Good morning and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Augusta. I'm Jezebel Anat, your worship associate this morning. And our service today is a remembrance, Yom HaShoah, remembrance of all those who perished in the Holocaust. Our speaker is Joseph Zuchowski. He's our church custodian. He's a writer, activist, Wiccan high priest, and actor, and he had family on both sides of the European conflict. But we'll begin with announcements from our board president-elect, Marcia Frank.
Good morning. As you noticed, we're using a new Zoom format for our Sunday services. You join today's service with your video on and audio muted. For the best experience during the service, please select speaker view. The person speaking will automatically appear in your screen. You can click the chat button to send a text message to everyone, host, or directly to an individual. You can see the names of those who have joined the service in the pop-up menu above the text box. To participate in joys and sorrows, click the reactions button and click on or raise hand. Please remain muted until your name is called. When you're done speaking, please mute yourself again. After the service, we'll ask everyone to unmute and switch to gallery view for fellowship. Thank you for your donations to the Family Ministry Wing renovations to date. Please consider donating to the painting project by April 30th. You can designate your donations to the FM Wing or Adopt a Wall. As of March 22nd, we were $1,304 away from our goal. Excess donations will be used to replenish the multi-year maintenance fund, which helped fund the Family Ministry Wing ceiling project. Sunday RE classes for school-age kids K through 5th grade have resumed, and they're meeting from 10:10 to 10:50. The classes are led by Lynn Bonner with help from Kim Miner, and the Zoom link and other information are in the announcements. The Humanist Free Thought Group will meet this evening at 5 p.m. online. You can contact Frank Carl for information about that. The middle and high school age youth group will meet tonight from 6:30 to 8 p.m. in person at the church and online. The Zoom link again is in the announcements. The UU Monday meditation group gathering will meet online and face-to-face in the sanctuary. And that's Monday at from 7 to 8:30. You can contact Elizabeth McNabb or Melanie Roberts for information. The Wednesday evening exploration group continues the discussion of Ibram X. Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist, and they're doing this via Zoom on Wednesday evening at 7, and you can contact Jan Parsons for information about that. We have our board meeting this coming Thursday, and it is going to be in person and online at the church, and that's at 6:30. You can contact Alan George for information on that. There'll be a play date on Saturday, April 17th from 10:30 until noon for elementary age kids and their parents. And this is for some outdoor fun at the church playground. And the craft activity, or a craft activity, will be led by Lynn Bonner. The parents group will meet April 18th on Sunday at 12:15 following the regular Sunday service. Zoom link will be in the announcements, and you can check this week's announcements for information about all of these things. Thank you and have a good service. Back to you, Jezebel.
Thank you, Marcia. And now let us gather in body and spirit and enter into our time of worship. And for this service, we have some very special opening music that David Netchus, our music director, will introduce.
Good morning, everybody. It's a beautiful day out there, but a serious topic here this Sunday. And we don't have an opening hymn this morning, we have an opening song. And rather than listening to someone sing it to you and just watch the words, we have it as part of a slideshow. The images are from the Holocaust. They're not the most disturbing images one can see, which is a measure of how atrocious that event was. And anyway, we present this opening hymn, opening song, and slideshow.
Thank you, David. And as we light our chalice today, I would invite all of you to reflect on the honored history of this symbol. I know when we were first, Joe and I were first coming to this church, and it was Roy Reynolds who told us about the history of the chalice and that it was a symbol of resistance during the First World War. It was a symbol of the Unitarian Service Committee, and it was used in their work to aid the Eastern Europeans who were escaping Nazi persecution. So in that spirit of resistance and helping the persecuted, let us light our chalice this morning. And now it is time that we gather as a congregation to share our joys and sorrows. And here is Chris Palmer from our pastoral care team.
Good morning, everyone. And now is the time in the service when we invite us to share the joys and sorrows that have recently come into our lives. First, we'll remember those who cannot be with us today. We also remember those in military service and their families.
And sorrows, and also one for Yom HaShoah. Now is our time of meditation. So I'd invite everyone to sit comfortably, feet on the ground. Breathe deeply, breathe into your center. Feel your feet on the ground, connected with the earth that has supported so many generations of humanity. Allow your breath to be deep, relax your shoulders, unclench your jaw, and allow your body to soften. Viktor Frankl wrote, "Man is that being who invented the gas chambers of Auschwitz, and he is also that being who enters those chambers upright with the Lord's Prayer of the Shema Yisrael on his lips." In 1945, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross visited the Majdanek concentration camp and found butterflies scratched with pebbles or fingernails into the barracks' wooden walls. She wrote, "They knew that soon they would become butterflies. Once dead, they would be out of that hellish place, not tortured anymore, not separated from their families, not sent to gas chambers. None of this gruesome life mattered anymore. Soon they would leave their bodies the way a butterfly leaves its cocoon." And there are other instances of the butterfly being a Holocaust symbol. And Stephen, if you could show, oh, you got the graphic up. This is a painting by Karl Bodek and Kurt Conrad Lowe called One Spring, 1942, that is now in the Yad Vashem Art Museum in Jerusalem. And these artists composed this painting in collaboration when they were both held at the Gors camp in southern France. A hopeful image depicting how beyond the wired world where they were both being held, the world was always out there. Let it be a reflection on how the affairs of man are relevant against the beauty of nature, and how that even if we are caged, we can still have fluttering butterflies in our spirit. So during our moment of silence, let us look to the butterfly. April is National Poetry Month. So the theme for our readings this month is poetry, of course. And today's reader is Tom Lehman.
Good day, everyone. This is a paraphrase of the original poem by Martin Niemöller, a German who survived the Holocaust, not a Jew himself, but you'll see in the poem. First, they came for the socialists, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a trade unionist. Then they came for the gypsies, and I did not speak out because I wasn't a gypsy. Then they came for the Jehovah's Witnesses, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a Jehovah's Witness. Then they came for the mentally impaired. Again, I didn't speak out. I wasn't mentally impaired. Then they came for the Jews, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a Jew. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out. Thank you.
Now is the time that we can contribute to our church so that it can continue to speak out for the voiceless and be a presence of liberal religion and social action within our community. So the link to donate will come up on your screen and in the chat. And here is David with our offertory.
Good morning, and thank you for allowing me this time to be here today. Arthur C. Clarke said that behind every man stands 20 ghosts, for that is the number by which the dead outnumber the living. Our ancestors, our families, friends, total strangers, people we barely know, have all born, lived, and died, and some under the most horrific conditions humanly imaginable. I have a question that I would like to put to everyone here. How many of you know somebody who either survived the Holocaust or knew people who were victims of it? How many here know of anybody? I'm not asking you about I'm not telling you, yes, well, I read the Diary of Anne Frank. No, that doesn't count. I mean, actually knew somebody. Well, I'll make it easy for you. Here's one. Two. My family came from Poland. Only when my family came from Poland over 100 years ago, I find that sometimes a little hard to say, 100 years. When my family came here over 100 years ago, there was no Poland. It was a subdivided nation. There were a people, there were a culture, there was a language, but there was no country. You were either Prussian, which was controlled by Germany, Russian, or Austro-Hungarian. And my family came from different parts of that map there. It wasn't until 1919 that Poland was reestablished as a nation in order to create a buffer zone between Western Europe and Eastern Europe, Russia primarily, because of the communist revolution that occurred there. In 1920, there was a minor war. Minor in the sense that how many here have ever heard of the Polish-Russian War? Exactly. Polish troops faced the Russians and pushed them back across the border into the Ukraine. With knowing my family, I probably had, as just said, I probably had family on both sides of that conflict too. But as I was saying, my family came here over 100 years ago. My paternal grandparents were able to book passage and come here as a couple. My maternal grandparents, my grandfather came here first, and he was saving money so that he could bring his wife and daughter over as soon as possible. And unfortunately, this little thing called World War I started. I mean, that blew plans for everybody, okay? And my grandfather, well, he enlisted. He spoke Polish, he spoke English, and he spoke German. So obviously they made him into a translator. He was necessary processing the POWs, soldiers, etc. My grandmother, on the other hand, had a very interesting experience during this war. The village where she came from was destroyed. People were refugees. They were scattered. Her and my Aunt Mary, her daughter, who was a child at the time, were doing their best to keep body and soul together. My grandmother fell ill. My Aunt Mary hid her as best she could, and she went to look for help. Where is a 10-year-old girl going to find help in the middle of a war zone? Well, she came upon a band of people who were very used to traveling. We called them Rom, but back then they were known as gypsies. It was night. The camp was quiet. In the center of the camp was a cauldron on a cook fire and a metal cup. Gypsy custom, Rom custom. You would leave a pot there for anybody in the bottle, anybody in the compania. If they were hungry, they could have some. My Aunt Mary took the cup, took some soup out of the pot, made her way back to where her mother was hidden. While she was getting her mother to drink the soup, my grandmother to drink the soup, she heard something. She turned around, and there was a gypsy woman and two gypsy men standing there, three Roms standing there. She had heard all the stories of how horrific the gypsies were, how terrible they were. I keep using the term gypsy, forgive me. It's a term I grew up with. It's a term I'm familiar with. That the Rom would torture and kill or sell into slavery. The woman came over to my grandmother, looked at her. She motioned for the two men to come over, and they carried her back to the camp. My grandmother and aunt stayed with this compania for the rest of the war, traveling with them. We think about small acts. If it wasn't for that act, I would not be standing here today. My parents would never have been born. My father served in the Pacific Theater in World War II. My uncle Steve served in the European theater. My father was involved in the liberation of a couple of POW camps. My uncle Steve saw firsthand what happened in the concentration camps. This left such an impression on these men. These were hardworking, battle-hardened men that to their last days, they could not speak easily on what they saw and experienced. I first learned of Yom HaShoah working at the Jewish Community Center. The first place, what I love about the Jewish Community Center was, it was the first place in all of Augusta when Jez and I first moved here, the people there could say my last name right. Now, what a relief. I mean, what's so hard about Zuchowski? You say it the way it's spelled. But anyway, I learned about Yom HaShoah. Now, to understand exactly what Shoah means, it does not mean Holocaust. It means calamity. It means tragedy. It means catastrophe. It means something that marks history. In thinking about this, I think of something that Hitler said. He was once asked, what if this fails? What if we lose the war? How will Germany be remembered for this? And Hitler supposedly casually replied, who remembers the Armenians? Referring to the slaughter of the Armenians by the Turks during World War I in 1915. When I first learned about the Shoah, I learned it was in honor of the 6 million Jews that were put to death. And my thought was this: 13 million people died in those camps. Rome, Jews, dissidents, everyday people who just fell into on the wrong side of luck and fortune. 13 million people. To put it to you in a way that's more understandable, New York State has about 30 million people in it. Imagine if the population of the 5 boroughs was obliterated. Does that give you a context to work this into? 13 million people. In some parts of Europe, there were no doctors. There were no teachers. There was no one, because if they were Jews or they fell into one of the undesirables, the Untermenschen, as they were called, the subhumans, they were taken to these camps. Now, another interesting thing about this was, in Germany, there were no death camps, but they were labor camps and concentration camps, but there were no death camps. Forgive me if I wander, but this is an extremely important topic to me. As I was speaking of my grandparents, they were living here when World War II erupted. Again, communications were lost. Finally, when they were reestablished, my grandmother would ask my mother or someone who could read and write Polish to write to these people that she remembered and ask, what happened to this one? What happened to that one? More than not, she got back the reply, Zaniewie, we don't know. The Nazis took them. Those few words, the Nazis took them, was all she needed to know. The idea that anybody was alive after hearing those words went right out the window. We think and ask ourselves, oh yes, one more thing. At one of the Yom HaShoah commemorations at the center, I once asked, did they ever read the names of those who were put to death? And Leah Ronan, my director, said, yes, one year they did this. It took 4 days. It took 4 days to read all the names of the people who were put to death. And even to this day, 75 years later, we still wonder if the number is correct. Why? Because so many of the records were destroyed in the last days of the war and had to be pieced together by, in some cases, they had to be pieced together by the survivors who might have who could remember somebody or who might have knew the person who died. I remember reading, and I don't want to paint the Germans as monsters. They were caught up in a madness that was hard for us to understand at times. But if we look at the world we are living in right now, is it really that hard to understand? I remember reading a story told by a young German man whose father was a camp guard. He would come home from his work at the camp as a guard and would wash himself. He would take off his uniform and he would wash himself and he would scrub himself so hard. At times he abraded his skin. And the young man said that his father would spend the time off he had sitting alone in a dark room, smoking cigarettes, drinking schnapps, and praying that he could be forgiven. This was the effect of the Shoah. I mean, there's a terrible joke from that time. Two men are discussing the political situation, and one of them out of the corner of his eye sees a cockroach running along the wall. He quickly gets up, jumps over, and slams his foot into the cockroach, crushing it. And then he grinds it to make sure it's dead. And his friend says, "Why did you do that?" He said, "Don't you realize he could have been a government agent?" This was the level of paranoia. This was the level of fear. No one escaped it. The ideology of racial superiority, the concept, this is not new in human history. Unfortunately, I hate to say this, human history has often been written by the hand of the victor with the blood of the vanquished. While American soldiers were fighting for the liberation of Europe, we had Jim Crow going on here in the South and in parts of the North and the Midwest. We think about the slaughter of the Jews and the Egyptians and everybody there, but what about the slaughter of the Native Americans? How many of us grew up watching the old Westerns where the family of settlers is being attacked by the Indians, and over the hill you hear the sound of the bugle and the cavalry comes to save the day? And when you think about it, what were these Indians doing? What were these Native peoples doing? They were fighting to defend their homeland. They were fighting to defend the territories, the cultures, the languages they knew. What was the difference between the concentration camp in Poland and the reservation here in the Great Plains? Technology, that's about it. But the ideology was the same. Push them off, get rid of them. Human history is a constant struggle. A constant struggle that we face every day, a choice we make as to what type of person we will be. Yom HaShoah teaches us the very depths of human degradation, but yet it also teaches us the heights of human survivability, the strength that we possess. The survivors, those who remembered, those who are remembered, they are a part of that too. But think of this. Most of us are in our declining years. Within another generation, there will be no one left alive who actually remembered what happened. There will be books on it. There will be movies on it. There will be documentaries coming up to here on it. But there will no longer be any people who lived to see and remember it. We do not like to have our noses rubbed in our own failings. Unfortunately, sometimes we have to. That is why when I wanted to do this service, I'm including everyone. Even we, the survivors now, are included in this. When we think about what happened, don't think, no, it can't happen. It can happen. It did happen. And God damn it. We should be damned if we let it happen again. We had just recently I'll use a word that my grandparents taught me so often, and it's a way I could describe our 45th president. Ten pascuni durlaki hulera. Translation was, he's not a very nice person. Actual translation was that vile, idiotic bastard. But cholera, by the way, means a plague. It's literally cholera, if you must know. So to call somebody a cholera means you want him around you about as much as you want a case of cholera. We had his dream of a second, probably a presidency for life, was shattered. And now how many states are seeking to enact laws to make voting more difficult? Remember, Hitler did not come to power through blood and guts. He did not, he was voted in. It was a devil's agreement between the National Socialist Party and the German Conservative Party, because the German Communist Party was fairly strong at that time in the parliament. It was that union which created the Nazi Party and made him the prime minister, put him in charge. He made him the chancellor. A vote that cost 13 million lives, a vote that helped put 30 million people in the European theater. They died because of that vote. That is why history is so important. That is why we must remember. We talk about cleaning up, sanitizing, sparing. No, I was not spared the stories of my parents and my grandparents, what it was like to grow up here, to be called a dumb Polak, to be able to get a job because you could not speak the language properly. How many of us remember their grandparents or their great parents telling us signs to say no Catholic, no Irish need to apply? How about in the South down here? Whites only, blacks and Negroes use the back door. That is our history. That is what we must never forget. Because if we do forget it, we just open the door and say, please, come on back in. I'm sorry if I'm wandering around the place, but it is a topic that is very wide-ranging and it's very pertinent to me. I'm thinking here as I go through these notes that I made of what I want to convey. I want to convey a sense that we today are alive and have this luxury because of the sacrifice of those behind, those who have given up all their very last. My grandmother, when I'm sorry, I'm thinking of a funny story. Maybe I should say it, that'll help lighten the mood a little bit, but a little known secret. My full name is Joseph Andrew Oscar Zuchowski. How did I get the name Joseph Andrew? Well, my father's name was Andrew, my grandfather's name was Joseph, and the man who helped my grandfather come to America was a man named Oscar, who was a Jewish man, by the way. And my grandfather promised him that when he had a son, he would name him Oscar. My grandfather had 4 daughters. And he asked every one of them, when you have a son, proszę, please, za imię jego Oscar, name him Oscar. Well, I never really knew too much about my grandfather. He died when I was about 2 years old. But supposedly at my baptism, as I was getting sprinkled, the priest said, in the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, I name you Joseph Andrew. And my grandfather yelled out, Oscar! Another trait about my grandfather, which I fortunately do not share, was on Sunday, my grandfather would come home with the paper, have his coffee, have his cigars, read his paper, and he would tell everybody his opinion on everything he read, whether they wanted to hear it or not. Fortunately, I don't share that trait. But it's these stories. I know they seem they're amusing, and that's why, because there's only through our ability to laugh, to find meaning in this life, in this world, that keeps us sane and going. My family had, as Jess said, my family had people on both sides of the conflict. I had family in Germany, I had family in Poland, I had family here. And sometimes I often wondered overseas which cousin was killing the other. This is a very important day for all of us. And I know the history, and I know we can all research the history. Don't let it die. I saw someone post on Facebook comparing the camps, the concentration camp, calling the camps where the refugee children are being held as concentration camps. I know he did this as a way of wanting to instigate an argument. But there was a major difference. Those children are there because their parents, for the most part, sent them there to find a better life, that they could be, hopefully they'd be rescued and and have a chance to live in a comparatively free and stable nation. They weren't sent there to die. Unfortunately, the people who are in charge of these camps are not equipped to deal with what is happening. That's the biggest calamity and crime of all. Going back to what Hitler said, who remembered the Armenians? Well, obviously he remembered it. He remembered them because he brought it up. And now everyone who is hearing what I'm saying knows of them. Now they are remembered. So who remembers the Armenians? We remember the Armenians. Who remembered the Jews? We remember the Jews. Who remembered the gays, the communists, the socialists, all the ones the people that Tom mentioned and those that he didn't. Here's something I bet most of you don't know. Did you know that there was a concentration camp right outside of Paris? Most people don't know this. There was a concentration camp right outside of Paris, France. Do you know who most of the victims were? The biracial children of African Americans and French people. The African Americans who came during World War I found the racial climate more equitable and stayed and raised families. The majority of people who died in that camp in France, they were the mixed race children of Americans and French people. Now they are remembered. And I hope that those of you out there who have grandchildren and that are capable of understanding, tell them, explain to them. Don't be afraid to show them the pictures. Don't be afraid to tell them what happened. It wasn't that long ago. Because if we don't, like I said, it will happen again. I want to close with the Mourner's Kaddish. I'll do the best I can because, one more small thing. The yarmulke I'm wearing was made for me by my grandmother. I had it on the day I made my confirmation. It was tucked in my jacket as I went up there to become a good Catholic. See how that worked out? I am probably the only kid in the history of St. Anthony's Grammar School who made his confirmation with a yarmulke in his pocket. Yitgadal v'yitkadash Shemai Rabbah B'Shima Divera Chutere V'Yamlik Malkutei Decha yel chom, uve yome chom uvecha, yel dechol beit Yisrael bagala uvive jam vezes amen kariv veima amen. Oshe shalom bimore hu yasher shalom alenu kol Israel Yisrael veimeru amen. The words mean, let the glory of God be exalted. Let his great name be hallowed in the world whose creation he willed. May his kingdom prevail in our own day and in our own lives and in the life of all Israel. And let us say amen. May the one who caused peace to reign in high heavens, let peace descend on us, on all Israel, and on all the world. And let us say amen. Thank you very much for this time.
Thank you, Joe, for those very informative words and heartfelt words, much to think about. Our closing hymn today is hymn number 95, There Is More Love Somewhere, and it is led by Miss Amanda Main, and we're very thankful that she's helping us record hymns. And I should also mention that all of the keyboard music today comes from the Eastern European Jewish Romish tradition. And so we have to say that. And so now, hymn number 95, please sing along at home.
There is more love somewhere. There is more love somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more love somewhere. There is more hope somewhere. There is more hope somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more hope somewhere. There is more peace somewhere. There is more peace somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more peace somewhere. There is more joy somewhere. There is more joy somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more joy somewhere.
So in closing, I would like to remind everyone of our first principle, the inherent worth and dignity of every human being, that we do not use labels and classifications to denigrate or belittle others, but all share in the beauty and joy of this world. We'll have Spirit of Life, and I wanted to introduce our postlude. It's an Italian folk song called Bella Ciao that became a symbolic song and anthem of the Italian resistance. The words mean goodbye, beautiful. And in the song, the partisan is saying goodbye to his or her beloved and going off to fight the fascists. And in the lyrics, it says that if I die, bury me by a flower tree so that everyone will know I died fighting for freedom. And so here is Spirit of Life and Bella Ciao. Bella Ciao means goodbye, beautiful.
Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the streams of compassion, blowing the wind, rising the sea. In the hand, giving life the shape of justice, roots forming coast, wings of setting free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
Mattina mi son svegliato. Oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. Una mattina mi son svegliato ed ho trovato l'invaso. Oh partigiano, portami via. Oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. Partigiano, portami via. Perché mi sembra di morire. E se io muoio sulla montagna, oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. E se io muoio sulla montagna, tu mi devi seppellire. Seppellire sulla montagna, oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. Seppellire sulla montagna, sotto le ombra di un bel fiore. E tutte quelle ci passeranno, oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. E tutte quelle ci passeranno, e poi diranno seppellire. E questo è il fiore, mi partigiano. Oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. E questo è il fiore, mi partigiano. La morte della libertà. Una mattina mi son svegliato. Oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. Una mattina mi son svegliato ed ho trovato l'invasore. Oh partigiano, portami via. Oh bella
Okay, so that's it, guys. Not quite sure how we're gonna do the discussion yet with people and online, but
Joe.
Thank you, Tom.
Very, very good.
I didn't get too carried away, did I?